If you're yearning for something that rises above the dysfunctional politics of Washington, we have just the thing. 288 feet above, in fact. Tomorrow marks the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Capitol Dome. It's hard to imagine America without this crowning achievement, but when you hear the story of how it was created, it becomes hard to imagine that our dome exists at all. We were given amazing access for this story, and you're about to see the dome like you've never seen it before. George Washington knew what he wanted, a building so grand that no one could ever move the Capitol from his city. He'd still find it on Jenkins Hill, where he laid the cornerstone. And he might admire the dome, which was built later, for what it overcame. Built by men who despised each other, topped by a statue of freedom cast by a slave. Through war and rivalry, the dome kept rising. And that's American character that runs deep below the skin.
This is when we go from that beautifully, richly decorated Capitol to the battleship gray industrial part of the Capitol building.
Stephen Ayers holds the title Architect of the Capitol. He takes care of the dome and everything below.
This is all original. It's all 150 years old.
Yes, it is.
All of this was designed by Ayers' predecessor, Thomas Walter, who proposed a dome no one had asked for. This is the Capitol that George Washington knew, and it's still the center of the Capitol building today. Walter won a competition to expand the House and Senate sides to hold all of the politicians coming in from the new states. But then, Walter thought the original dome looked too small, so he drew another.
He posted it on the wall in his office, and members of Congress would often come by and see that, and it just stuck immediately. Didn't even have a cost estimate, didn't know how they were going to construct it, how they were going to build it, how they were going to design it, yet it was so beautiful and so wonderful, everyone just knew immediately that they had to do it.
Walter drafted it after the great marble domes he'd seen in Europe, only to discover that the building couldn't support the weight. So he conjured an illusion. Everything, every column, every ornament is cast iron, painted to look like stone. The weight was cut in half.
Wow.
This is from 1863, and you can see it's signed by Thomas Eustace Walter.
His drawing in the archive reveals there are two domes, an inner dome with a ceiling painted with an apotheosis of George Washington ascending into heaven, and the outer dome ascending into the sky.
We are climbing atop this inner dome, the apotheosis of Washington fresco by Constantino Bramidi.
That's right below us.
Yes.
We're on top of that now.
That's exactly right, and this is the level that we go outside.
This is the top.
This is the top.
Wow. What a beautiful view.
It's about 30 stories, and because D.C. outlawed skyscrapers back in 1910, you can see forever. For the record, the Washington Monument, still being refurbished, is nearly twice as tall.
So there's the National Mall. They're taking the scaffolding down off the Washington Monument.
Yes. You can see the Potomac River and Anacostia Rivers coming together.
Stephen, what did it mean to have this dome completed very near the end of the Civil War?
To me, it's a measure of our endurance, of our will to succeed, and our will to get it done, and our will to stay together as a country.
It took enormous will. In Congress, the first vote on the dome passed 71 to 70. A critic called it a great mistake. And then came the Civil War. Not the war you're expecting. This was the war between the greats, the brilliant architect versus the genius in charge of construction, Army Captain Montgomery Meigs.
He was incredibly honest, very efficient.
Bill Allen was the historian in the office of the architect who told us that despite Meigs' virtues, he was obsessed with winning fame.
And the way that he chose to do this was to put his name in every place that it occurred to him where it could go.
It went on the bricks of the D.C. aqueduct and on its stairs. M.C. Meigs even etched his name on copper plates and laid them between the stones of the Capitol.
In case 2,000–3,000 years later, the Capitol became an archaeological site, the archaeologists would discover these plates and know exactly who built the Capitol extension.
But the last straw came when Meigs claimed authorship of the dome, signing his name to Walter's drawings. The two men stopped talking and raised their pens like swords.
The letters are well worth reading. They are amazing.
We found them in the archive. Meigs, you're welcome to assume the authorship of the pyramids of Egypt. You have no right to the new dome. Walter, if I'm not the architect of the new dome, I'd like to know who is. I shall be glad never to receive another line from you. Meigs, I have the honor to inform you that your services are dispensed with.
He fired him.
He tried to. Walter, very calmly, writes back and says, I would like to remind you that my appointment is at the pleasure of the President of the United States.
The work slowed, but planning continued, including a debate about what to put on top.
They decided that they would have a statue that would speak of freedom.
Historian Lonnie Bunch researched the project for Congress.
And they went to a young American in Rome who was studying, and he came up with this idea to create a statue that had the look of America.
Describe her to me in your mind's eye.
Well, she is this beautiful woman who has some Native American features, is capped by this beautiful headdress as a reminder that this is a country that was different because it was built first and foremost around the issue of freedom.
And one of the men instrumental in casting the statue was a slave named Philip Reed.
Philip Reed was an enslaved man who was owned by someone who owned a foundry here in Washington. And that when the statue, initially plaster, came back to the United States, there was a concern about how do you take it apart? Philip was really one of the people who knew how to do this. And he came up with the idea of how to separate the model, how to then cast the model. He led the people who were making the cast of the bronze statue.
But freedom would be grounded in 1861 when the real Civil War began. Montgomery Meigs left to become quartermaster general, supplying the Army with all that it needed for victory. But all the money for construction was diverted to the war.
One of my favorite stories that I'd love to tell my friends is that Lincoln ordered the dome to continue as a symbol that the nation would continue, and that story turns out to be false.
Yeah.
Matt Wisniewski, a historian for the House, told us it was the contractor, James Fowler Kirtland of New York, that resumed work without pay. They'd delivered 1.3 million pounds of cast iron and didn't want to see it rust away. Lincoln didn't mind.
He has the famous line that if the people see the Capitol going on, it will be a sign that we intend the Union shall go on.
This is the Rotunda. You're walking between statues of Washington and Jefferson. It's just off this room that you find the office of the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, who administers a lot of what he calls the campus.
You ever not look up? Do you ever take this for granted?
Never. Listen, for a guy who grew up mopping floors in my dad's bar, it's a pretty humbling experience.
You've come up in the world.
Just a little.
We went up in the world from the floor of George Washington's original Capitol to the heights of the Inner Dome.
Told you it'd be beautiful up here.
This is The Apotheosis of Washington by Constantino Brumidi.
I understand that somewhere in here the artist painted the face of the architect who designed the dome.
It's right over here.
Thomas Walter is the one in the long white beard.
Yes.
The scenes depict American hard work and ingenuity, and 180 feet below, 21st century citizens look up at Washington rising at the center of the city, laid down by he and urban planner Pierre L'Enfant.
Look how L'Enfant laid out this city with these radiating streets. Maryland and Pennsylvania, New Jersey and Delaware.
The Capitol right in the center.
Right in the middle.
And everything proceeds from here.
And you put the Capitol atop this hill. And that's how you create this iconic symbolism.
It was a symbol for the whole nation that the Union would endure. Now your job is to make the dome endure.
Up here, you can see what is hidden from a distance. The dome is falling apart.
Your guys bring in pieces into the office and say, hey boss, here's what I found.
And you can see the level of rust behind it that is just eating away at the cast iron.
Even worse, there are more than 1,300 serious cracks in the dome. Architect Stephen Ayers is starting a massive repair project. He showed us how they'll cover the dome with scaffolding for the next 2 years, replace the rusted parts, and stitch the cracks together with metal sutures. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi helped Congress put up nearly $60 million for the work.
A lot of people think that you guys can't agree about anything, and yet everybody came around the idea of refurbishing the dome.
This Capitol belongs to the American people. It is this place for them to visit as the most identifiable symbol of democracy that there is.
On December 2nd, 1863, the dome was topped with the Statue of Freedom. And below, Congress had been working on freedom too. It had passed an Emancipation Act for the District of Columbia.
When Philip Reed helped cast the Statue of Freedom, he was a slave. By the time it's placed on top of the dome, he's a free man.
He is free. What happens to him is that he symbolizes so many of the enslaved African Americans who looked at that dome and saw it as a place of possibility, saw it as a place that said, here is the freedom that we deserve.
The titanic struggle that crowned the Capitol is largely forgotten now.
The House will be in order.
But next time you look on political gridlock and wonder whether anything can get done, remember how much can rise above the fractured politics of Washington.
The motion is adopted.
Almost exactly 4 years ago, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris caught fire. It was one of those 21st century moments that people around the world experience together, staring in horror at live video on their smartphones and televisions. For the people of France, it was especially traumatic, because Notre Dame has been a powerful symbol, both sacred and secular, since medieval times. French President Emmanuel Macron pledged that Notre Dame would be reopened by the end of 2024. He couldn't have known then how hard it would be to keep that promise. But on this Easter Sunday, 4 years later, the resurrection of the great cathedral seems within reach. Flames tore through the roof of Notre Dame on the evening of April 15, 2019. And spread with incredible speed and ferocity, engulfing her 200-foot spire.
Everybody stops.
Jean-Louis Georgelin is the man now in charge of restoring Notre Dame.
And a lot of people in France cry because they feel that something very deep in the soul of France, in the spirit of France, was about to collapse.
Only a heroic effort by the Paris Fire Brigade saved Notre Dame from collapse, as a few staffers raced through falling embers to rescue precious relics. Philippe Villeneuve, the cathedral's chief architect, was out of town that night and raced back to Paris. He was devastated by what he saw. I've said that the little boy who was in love with the cathedral and the architect who was in charge of it died that day, and another man took over and said, I have to save the cathedral. It's my mission. It's my duty. Villeneuve now shares that duty. If he's the artist who knows every inch of stone in Notre Dame, retired Army General Georgelin is the commander, called back to meet that 5-year deadline.
I will relax only when this will be done.
What does this cathedral mean to the people of France?
The Cathedral Notre Dame de Paris is in some way the heart of France. For the Catholic, of course, for the Christian, but for everybody. All the great events of France in some way or another took place here in the cathedral.
Napoleon crowned himself emperor in Notre Dame in 1804. In 1944, as Paris was liberated from Nazi occupation, General Charles de Gaulle braved sniper fire to enter the cathedral.
In many ways, you could say that she's the People's Palace.
Agnès Poirier is a journalist and author who lives and works just across the River Seine from Notre Dame. She and her neighbors watched the most horrifying moment the night of the fire, the collapse of that imposing spire.
I remember the scream of the crowd saying no, as if they couldn't conceive such a thing.
That spire meant so much to Philippe Villeneuve that he had it tattooed on his arm.
On dit que j'ai Notre-Dame dans la peau.
They say that I have Notre Dame in my skin, he told us. It's very practical because when I have to explain how the spire fell, it's always better to show that from here to there it tipped over. The huge spire, made of oak and covered in lead tiles, crashed through two of the stone vaults which form the ceiling of Notre Dame, leaving gaping holes at the top and heaps of broken stone and charred wood on the floor below.
Deuxième élément, c'est l'espèce de tabouret.
The top priority was to shore up the grand cathedral's weakened structure. Huge temporary wooden supports were placed under the surviving stone vaults of her ceiling and under the flying buttresses to save this prime example of medieval engineering.
We have to check every stone in the cathedral, every pillar.
At the same time, a huge decontamination project was mounted to remove lead tiles that had melted from the burning roof and spire and all the toxic lead dust spread by the fire. 4 years on, workers still take extraordinary precautions against lead poisoning. We had to wear disposable hazmat suits to enter the cathedral. Tons of rubble had to be removed. Paintings and stained glass windows were taken away for restoration, and twisted steel scaffolding erected for ongoing restoration work had to be dismantled.
So you were in the process of restoring the spire when the fire broke out in 2019. Did your restoration project have anything to do with the fire breaking out?
Une enquête a toujours lieu.
An investigation is still underway, Philippe Villeneuve told us, and no cause of the fire has been identified. But personally, it's unbearable. This fire never should have happened, and it did. Inevitably, I feel responsible.
So, you know...
At that point in our interview, Villeneuve switched to English with a rueful smile.
In reality, I'm totally destroyed.
Really?
Yes. I so want to rebuild Notre Dame is because I want to rebuild myself.
The fire's deeply emotional impact on Philippe Villeneuve was mirrored around the world. Nearly $1 billion in private donations have been pledged to rebuild Notre Dame, most of it from France, $50 million from Americans.
I know many people in the United States contributed.
They can contribute again.
They can continue to contribute, huh?
The cash is always running. If I want, give me money, I need.
In the weeks immediately following the fire, all sorts of ideas were floated for how centuries-old Notre Dame might be given a touch of avant-garde.
And all those architects throughout the world said, yes, let's have a roof garden, let's have a golden torch, let's have a titanium spire. You know, even I, for 20 seconds, I thought, to add some 21st century genius to Notre Dame, why not?
Chief architect Philippe Villeneuve had a very simple answer, why not?
Un monument historique, une cathédrale.
An historic monument, a cathedral, is not something to be played with, he told us. Notre Dame had been standing for 850 years with a wooden frame and a lead roof. So wood is the way to go. In the end, President Macron and a special committee agreed to rebuild Notre Dame exactly as she had been. and with the same materials: stone, wood, and lead.
How is it that the traditionalists won out?
Well, I think wisdom won.
Notre Dame's signature spire was a fairly recent addition. Images of the cathedral from the mid-1800s show her without a spire and in an advanced state of decay.
The cathedral was in great disrepair, was it not?
It was about to collapse, but of neglect, not of fire.
There were even proposals to demolish Notre Dame before the cathedral crumbled on its own. Instead, the French government hired a young architect named Viollet-le-Duc. He created that famous spire.
So you are rebuilding the spire exactly as Viollet-le-Duc?
Yes.
Are you using his original drawings?
On a eu la chance.
We were lucky, he said, because it was extremely well documented. We have the drawings of Viollet-le-Duc, the sketches, the surveys. We have everything needed to be able to remake it. 1,000 French oak trees were felled for the new spire, then fine cut by carpenters in eastern France. In other workshops around the country, the cathedral's organ, the largest in France, and many of its stained glass windows were restored.
How many workers and craftsmen do you have on this project?
If we take into account all the people in France, it's about 1,000 people.
Allons-y.
On the plaza in front of Notre Dame, a huge tent has been erected where stonecutters and sculptors are recreating Gothic gargoyles and adornments damaged in the fire. Philippe Villeneuve supervises every detail.
Et je leur fais mettre les doigts sur des feuilles.
I'll make them put their fingers on the layers of the original sculpture, he said, and then on the layer they're sculpting.
So he wants you to feel it, not just look at it.
Yeah.
And that works?
Yeah, I think too.
Danae Leblanc is just 23 years old, sculpting and chiseling to recreate a floral detail carved hundreds of years ago. We try to remake things identically, she said, but we are also trying to understand the intention of the original sculptors. So we look at the traces left by their tools. We were given rare access to the painstaking restoration of Notre Dame as workers and artisans revived the cathedral's exterior,
The towers of the cathedral.
and her interior.
Oh my God.
The cathedral's great rose windows have been meticulously cleaned,
Look at this.
and every inch of stone coated with latex, which, when peeled away, leaves the surface gleaming. We found restorers, Mathilde Maire and Aude Massimi, working on painted stone sculptures depicting scenes from the life of Christ.
How old is this?
This part of the cathedral, she said, was built at the beginning of the 14th century. These sculptures are medieval. The restorers are carefully wiping every surface with small cotton swabs dipped in a water-based cleaning solution.
So I think you have to have a lot of patience.
Yes. Oui.
Yes, she says, you have to be calm and know that it will take time, but it's a pleasure.
You can see she's wiping away the centuries.
Yeah.
A 600-ton maze of scaffolding has been built inside Notre Dame to support all the work, especially the rebuilding of the spire. General Georgelin took us up through it, 2/3 of the way on a construction elevator. We reached the top, climbing steps and ladders.
This is incredible.
We were standing 100 feet above the cathedral floor, in exactly the spot where the flaming spire collapsed. 4 years ago, there was nothing here but a vast hole.
The drama took place here, and we have to rebuild the vault and the transept. The spire will be there, 66 meters high.
At the top of the old 200-foot spire sat a copper sculpture of a rooster, the symbol of the French people. The day after the fire, Philippe Villeneuve found it on a lower roof, a bit mangled but miraculously untouched by the flames. it has been left as it was found and will be put on display in the restored cathedral. Can I tell you, Villeneuve says, that I plan to put a new rooster on top of a new spire 1 year to the day before the reopening of the cathedral. There will still be scaffolding, but the frame of the spire will again be in the sky of Paris.
And the spire will reposer. Rest on these 4 pillars you see here. You see?
Be magnificent.
Magnificent, yes, for the glory of God and France.
We Americans spend 90% of our time inside of buildings, yet most of us give little thought to the role architecture plays in our lives and our health. Tonight we bring you a story about a group of award-winning young architects who have set out to create a new model of architecture, not a particular style of building, but a way of thinking about how to build, who should build, using what, and for whom. Their nonprofit firm, based in Boston, is called MASS, short for Model of Architecture Serving Society. And they were inspired early on by the work of Dr. Paul Farmer, who passed away unexpectedly just months after our story first aired last fall. Though trained at Harvard, MASS's founders say they learned the most important lessons of architecture during time they spent in, of all places, Rwanda. Rwanda is a country many people know for one thing, the 1994 genocide that killed more than 800,000 people. Today, Rwanda is at peace, a bustling nation of 13 million working hard to lift its population out of poverty. There are construction projects all around the country, several of them being designed by MASS. Though started by Americans, the head of its team in Kigali today is Rwandan architect Christian Benimana. I heard that when MASS started, there was no word for architect in your language.
And there is still no word for architect. You have an expression, umuhanga mu guhanga inyubako.
Meaning?
Expert in the creation of buildings. The amazing thing about
Benimana told us he dreamed of creating buildings even as a little boy. But with no school of architecture in post-genocide Rwanda, he had to study in China in Mandarin.
Everything is designed around the...
Michael Murphy, MASS's executive director, had a very different path to architecture.
I studied English literature.
Well, that's going to get you far in architecture.
Yes, which is...
Murphy's life took a sharp turn after college when his father was diagnosed with cancer, given just a few weeks to live. Murphy rushed back to Poughkeepsie, New York, to their old home that his dad had spent weekends restoring.
I said, what can I do while I wait here on death watch? And so I started working on the house. And after 3 weeks, he was still alive. 6 weeks, we started working together. After a year and a half, I'd fully restored the building. He was fully in remission. And he said, you know, working on this house with you, it saved my life. It healed me.
Whoa. Wow.
And then I said, well, I have to be an architect now.
When he came in wearing these silver cowboy boots.
Alan Ricks and Murphy became fast friends as first-year students at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. But as they dove in, both found something wanting in the curriculum.
We were learning about the heroism of architecture, the beautiful sculptures, the names of the famous architects.
But not so much about how architecture could help people and communities. During first semester, Murphy went to a talk by one of his idols, Dr. Paul Farmer, who had founded the nonprofit Partners in Health to provide medical care for the neediest populations around the world.
He said, we're building hospitals, we're building clinics, we're building schools. And so when I went up to him afterwards to ask, you know, who are the architects that you're working with? He said, you know, architects have never asked us how they could be of service to what we're doing. So we often have to do it ourselves.
Why weren't architects attracted to working with you? I mean, a lot of them care about the poor.
They certainly do. But the way the incentive structure is set up is, hey, you give us money, we'll design something for you.
So when Murphy offered to volunteer on a Partners in Health project in Rwanda the following summer of 2007, Dr. Farmer said, bring it on.
We gave him some very humble projects.
You're smiling. Must be pretty good.
He asked me if I would design a little laundry building.
A laundry building? Well, how did the laundry look?
It looked pretty good. It still looks good.
So good, he called Michael Murphy a few months later and asked if he could help design a brand new hospital for a remote district of 350,000 that didn't even have a doctor. You're still a student.
Still a student. So I looked around my classmates, said, this crazy call came in. Can anyone help me?
You said yes right away, without hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? What an opportunity.
But when Dr. Farmer said their first design looked like an army barracks, Murphy decided to take a year off and move to the site called Butaro, where Farmer gave him 3 challenges he says have defined Mass's work to this day. The hospital should be beautiful, building it should help as many local people as possible, and it should have natural airflow to prevent the spread of diseases like tuberculosis that often ran rampant in enclosed wards and waiting rooms.
Let me show you this image.
Murphy showed us the design they came up with to move fresh air naturally through each ward.
That's simple physics, where air moves from a lower to higher area.
Beds would go in the middle, giving every patient a beautiful view.
Beauty matters. The spaces around us that are designed with beauty say that we matter as individuals.
If I were a doctor, wouldn't I say, I care about beauty, but I want a heart monitor first?
Why make this a choice between a heart monitor and beauty? Surely we can have both.
What they couldn't have, heavy equipment like front-end loaders that were too costly to get to the site.
And so we asked, could we dig it by hand? And we dug the foundation by hand. Employ more people. And, shocker, we did it faster and cheaper than if we had the front-end loader.
How many people actually worked on this project total?
Over 4,000 people worked on the project.
And instead of trucking in materials, they decided to use volcanic stone that farmers here consider a nuisance because they have to clear it from their fields.
You see the stone everywhere, but normally it's just piled up, and we thought this would be a really valuable material in the US. Could we use it in a different way?
They designed the whole hospital facade with it, hiring dozens of local masons and spawning a new industry. This woman, who trained at Butaro, is now a forewoman with a team of masons she trains.
And the amount of hours they spend doing this.
Christian Benimana, back from Shanghai, was impressed by the thought given to the process of building and by giving so many people work, improving the local economy.
It is critical for us to have prospect for a better future.
And give people pride in Rwanda.
That's very important to me because it makes me proud as well.
He joined the team and helped design housing for doctors at the hospital.
Very quickly, we had a lot of work because there weren't many other people doing this.
They decided to become a nonprofit architecture firm to work on projects that otherwise couldn't afford high-priced designs. They've built a maternity care center in Malawi, a cholera hospital in Haiti, schools, all with the same principles of airflow, beauty, and creating jobs. A decade later, they have a staff of over 200, more than half of them Rwandan. This tree is even more beautiful close up. We visited Butaro Hospital last summer. Its central courtyard felt part medical center, part public gardens, and its covered outdoor waiting room and hallways, in this time of COVID, felt prescient.
This entire hospital is designed around that simple idea that airflow, air movement, are the basic premise that we should design our buildings around, and in particular our hospitals, so that patients don't transmit airborne diseases to each other.
4 hours to the south, we went to see Mass's largest project yet, a 69-building campus for a brand new College of Agriculture funded by American philanthropist Howard Buffett.
This space is really, we want to create a hub.
It's spectacular. Where Mass is pushing its philosophy to the limit, As Alan Rick showed us, just about everything here, from the earthen walls
The lines you see are the layers.
to the furniture,
The woven backrests of these chairs.
is being made locally. Under Christian Benimana's leadership, Mass started a furniture division to collaborate with local artisans on creative designs instead of ordering from a catalog.
It's one thing to go to Dubai and Turkey and China and Europe and pick a chair from a showroom, put it on a flight and bring it here. It's another thing to figure out a system that can create more opportunities for growth.
And if you're thinking Mass's model could never work in the U.S., Michael Murphy wasn't sure either until he was challenged by a community leader back home.
He said, "You're doing all this work in Haiti and Rwanda. When are you going to come back to your hometown and work with us in Poughkeepsie? We need a lot of help."
Poughkeepsie, like many once thriving industrial cities, has seen factories close, its downtown choked off by highways, its storefronts boarded up. To top it off, its creek flooded during Hurricane Irene.
We had just been in one of the most rural places in the world, and we had seen a hospital change the economy. I said, why can't we do that same thing here in Poughkeepsie?
So Mass opened a small office on Main Street and got to work.
Radiant light coming off of there.
Converting the city's old trolley barn into an art space and designing housing. It's helping turn this old building into a food hall.
We're going to save this building.
And converting this long-abandoned factory into a new headquarters for the environmental group Scenic Hudson.
If you look up, you can see that this whole opening was once a window.
That was a window?
That was all a window.
Oh my goodness. Murphy says old buildings like this were designed to let in fresh air. But with the invention of air conditioning, big windows became a liability. So we shrunk them and sealed our buildings airtight.
This is a sort of devil's bargain because it has made all of our buildings have really limited airflow, and hence during COVID we were all very vulnerable.
We saw it with the nursing homes.
And the prisons.
Do you think that COVID will change architecture for everybody?
Everyone around the world is going through a shift in their understanding of the buildings around us, that they may make us sicker, that they could make us healthier if they were better designed.
Mass's new design will reopen the windows and, like a cutting-edge version of the hospital in Rwanda, use a solar-powered system to heat and cool air at each window, eliminating traditional air conditioning and heating entirely. And they have a plan to transform that flooding creek that's become something of a garbage dump.
Some gutters, we get shopping carts.
What is that, an air conditioner? Mass landscape architect Sierra Bainbridge came here with ideas about widening the creek to help with flooding, but also,
if you're taking a holistic view of the problem, then the solution also begins to be a holistic view.
Mass came up with designs to turn the blighted creek into beautiful park space that would run all through Poughkeepsie.
Each project has to not solve for that one thing. We have to be thinking about how can we make design have the biggest possible impact.
It's a lesson Mass believes can apply in many American cities. They have projects now in Cleveland, Birmingham, and Santa Fe. And their gospel of architecture serving society has reached inside that ivory tower whose teachings they once found lacking. In 2021, Murphy taught lessons he learned in Rwanda back at Harvard.
There's some clear simplicity to it. There's things we have to build, there's people we have to hire, there's materials we have to use. And if you think about the whole thing as a design project, you can have a lot more impact.
In June, Mass was awarded the highest honor given by the American Institute of Architects, its 2022 Architecture Firm Award. At age 45, Chris Downey had pretty much constructed the life he'd always wanted. An architect with a good job at a small housing firm outside San Francisco, he was happily married with a 10-year-old son. He was an assistant Little League coach, an avid cyclist, And then doctors discovered a tumor in his brain. He had surgery, and the tumor was safely gone, but Downey was left completely blind. As we first reported in 2019, what he has done in the decades since losing his sight, as a person and as an architect, can only be described as a different kind of vision. Several mornings a week, as the sun rises over the Oakland estuary in California, an amateur rowing team works the water. It's hard to tell which one of them is blind, and Chris Downey thinks that's just fine.
It's really exciting to be in a sport where nobody looks in the direction they're going. You're faced this way in the boat, and you're going that way. So, okay, even Steven. We were just talking about that whole exterior.
It's not exactly even Steven in this design meeting, where Downey is collaborating with sighted architects on a new hospital building.
Or under the canopy where you can have downlights.
But he hasn't let that stop him.
Here you are in a profession that basically requires you to read designs and draw designs. You must have thought in your head, that is insurmountable.
No.
You never thought,
I never thought
you
that.
never thought the word
actually,
insurmountable.
Lots of people, friends that were architects, and anybody else would say, oh my God, it's the worst thing imaginable to be an architect and to lose your sight. I can't imagine anything worse. But I quickly came to realize that the creative process is an intellectual process. It's how you think. So it just needed new tools.
New tools? Downey found a printer that could emboss architectural drawings so that he could read and understand through touch.
They look like normal prints, normal drawings on the computer, but then they just come out in tactile form.
So it is like Braille, isn't it?
Right.
And he came up with a way to sketch his ideas onto the plans using a simple children's toy, malleable wax sticks that he shapes to show his modifications to others. And he says something surprising started to happen. He could no longer see buildings and spaces, but he began hearing them.
The sounds, the textures, and the sound changes because there's a canopy overhead.
You can sense that we're under a canopy?
Yes. It's all a matter of how the sound works from the tip of the cane. I was fascinated walking through buildings that I knew sighted, but I was experiencing them in a different way. I was hearing the architecture. I was feeling the space.
It sounds as if you began almost enjoying, in a way, being the blind architect.
Sort of this excitement of, I'm a kid again. I'm relearning so much of architecture. It wasn't about what I'm missing in architecture. It was about what I had been missing in architecture.
Is that sufficiently different?
Oh, yeah.
Chris Downey's upbeat attitude doesn't mean that he didn't go through one of the most frightening experiences imaginable and struggle. He and his wife Rosa were living in this same home with their son Renzo, then 10, when Downey first noticed a problem while playing catch with Renzo. The ball kept coming in and out of sight. The cause turned out to be a tumor near his optic nerve. Surgery to remove it lasted 9.5 hours. He says his surgeon had told him there was a slight risk of total sight loss, but that he'd never had it happen.
When he first came out of surgery, he was able to see.
But then things started to go wrong. The next day, half his field of vision disappeared. And then...
The next time I woke up, it was all gone. It was just black.
Complete and total darkness. No light, you can't see anything.
It's dark. It's all dark.
After days of frantic testing, a surgeon told him it was permanent, irreversible, and sent in a social worker.
She said, oh, and I see from your chart you're an architect, so we can talk about career alternatives.
Career alternatives?
Yeah.
Right away.
And been told I was officially blind for 24 hours.
And she's saying you can't be an architect
anymore. She is saying we can talk about career alternatives. So I felt like these walls were being built up around me, just like, yeah, you're getting boxed in.
Alone that night in his room, Downey did some serious thinking about his son and about his own father, who had died from complications after surgery when Downey was 7 years old.
I could quickly appreciate the wonder, the joy of, I'm still here.
It was actually joy?
Yeah, it's like, I'm still here with my family. My son still has his dad.
You know, your eyes are tearing up. You know that.
Yeah. Sorry. I always have a hard time talking through that.
He knew that how he handled this would send a strong message to Renzo.
I had been talking with him about the need to really apply himself. At the age of 10, it's that point where if you want something, you really have to work at it. And here I am, facing this great challenge.
So, motivated to set an example, he headed back to work only 1 month later.
This was the most healthy thing about Chris.
Brian Bashan is executive director of the nonprofit Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired in San Francisco, and is blind himself.
He waited a few days until the stitches were out of his skull, and 30 days after brain surgery, he was back in the office thinking, okay, there's got to be a way to figure this out, and I'm going to figure it out.
Bashan's organization, the Lighthouse, helps people new to vision loss learn how to figure things out.
Let's try the first line.
When someone becomes blind, the odds are 99% they've never met another blind person.
Is that right?
Yeah, that really is true. Blind people need those role models. How to be blind, how to hold down a job, how to live an independent life.
Specifically, how to work in the kitchen safely.
Good morning.
How to navigate public transportation. How to use screen reading software to listen to emails as quickly as the rest of us read them.
Did you understand that?
Yes.
No.
And most critically, how to get around in the world alone. Downey learned that at the Lighthouse.
When you first crossed a big street like this on your own, was it terrifying?
That is absolutely terrifying.
I can totally imagine.
I remember that day that stepping off the curb, you would have thought I was stepping into raging waters. Take a deep breath and go for it. You got to push through it.
Within a few months, he was traveling the streets on his own and getting back to normalcy with his son.
The first Father's Day came up. Rosa was like, so what do you want to do? You want to go on a picnic, go on a nice lunch? I want to play baseball with Renzo. Then Renzo was like, he pops up. I could feel him like jump to the edge of his chair. Baseball, you want to play baseball?
So Dad would throw to me and I'd play like I was playing first base.
How could he throw the ball to you?
I'd just call out, I'm over here.
Yeah, there you go.
And he'd point and I'd say, yeah, that's right. And then he'd throw it at me.
But that's something I really loved about our relationship. He quickly was looking for possibilities. He wasn't saying you can't do that. He was like, well, why not?
All right, here we go.
Downey seems to have a knack for finding windows when doors slam shut. Just 9 months after going blind, the recession hit, and he lost his job. But he got word that a nearby firm was designing a rehabilitation center for veterans with sight loss. They were eager to meet a blind architect. What are the chances?
You had to believe that God's hand came down.
It took my disability and turned it upside down. All of a sudden, it defined unique, unusual value that virtually nobody else had to offer.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Starting with that job, Downey developed a specialty, making spaces accessible to the blind. He helped design a new eye center at Duke University Hospital, consulted on a job for Microsoft, and signed on to help the visually impaired find their way in San Francisco's new and much delayed 4-block-long Transbay Transit Center, which we visited during construction.
If you're blind, you don't drive, all right? You don't like it when we drive. So, we're committed transit users. So the question was, how on earth do you navigate this size of facility if you're blind?
His solution? Grooves set into the concrete running the entire length of the platform.
Now we'll just follow this, following those grooves,
with a subtle change from smooth to textured concrete to signal where to turn to get to the escalators.
Would you like to give it a try?
Okay. I know to go straight because of this line, and I feel, oh my, so it's pretty obvious.
I can hear the
obvious.
difference from here.
It's something sighted people may never notice, and that's precisely the point. Downey believes in what's called universal design, that accommodates people with disabilities, but is just as appealing to people without them. It's the approach he used for his biggest project yet, consulting on the total renovation of a new 3-story office space for his old training ground, the Lighthouse for the Blind.
Coming into blindness need not be some dreary social service experience, but rather more like coming into an Apple store, thinking that there might be something fun around the corner.
One of Downey's ideas was to break through and link the 3 floors with an internal staircase that sighted people can see and the blind can hear.
In blindness, it's so wonderful to be on the 9th floor and hear a burst of laughter up on the 11th floor, or to hear somebody playing the piano on the 10th floor.
For the hallways, Downey chose polished concrete because of the acoustics.
I can hear the special tap of somebody's cane or the click of a guide dog's toenails.
Click of a dog's toenail?
Yeah.
Well, is that good or bad?
That's great. It's like you're seeing somebody coming down the hall. I know the sound of individual people who work here by the way they use their cane or the kind of walk they have.
You can really distinguish between people by how they tap their cane.
Absolutely.
If you hadn't had Chris working on this building, a blind architect,
it wouldn't have been as rich or so subtle, for sure.
Spring 2018 marked the 10-year anniversary of Downey losing his sight. So what did he do? He threw a party, a fundraiser for the Lighthouse, where he's been student, architect, and now president of the board.
Maybe a slightly bizarre thing, celebrating my 10-year blind birthday. But when you're 55 and you have a chance to be 10 again, you take it.
I get the feeling that you actually think you're a better architect today.
I'm absolutely convinced I'm a better architect today than I was sighted. To the north, okay.
If you could see tomorrow, would you still want to be able to feel the design?
If I were to get my sight back, it would be, I don't know. I would be afraid that I'd sort of lose what I've really been working on. I don't really think about having my sight restored. There's be some logistical liberation to it, but will it make my life better? I don't think so.
It's a story as old as cities themselves. Prosperity comes to town and triggers a building boom. In modern San Francisco, rows of skyscrapers have begun lining the downtown streets and recasting the skyline, monuments to the triumph of the tech sector. Leading this wave, the Millennium Tower. 58 stories of opulence, it opened in 2009 to great acclaim, then the tallest residential building west of the Mississippi. Though priced in the millions, the inventory of posh apartments moved quickly. Yet for all its curb appeal, the building has, quite literally, one fundamental problem. It's sinking into mud and tilting toward its neighbors. Engineering doesn't often make for rollicking mystery, but San Francisco is captivated by the tale of the Leaning Tower and the lawsuits it spawned. It's a story positioned, albeit at an angle, somewhere between civic scandal and civic curiosity, an illustration of what can happen when zeal for development overtakes common sense. When the fog rolls in over San Francisco, the skyscrapers live up to the name. The Transamerica Pyramid, long the gem of this skyline, now dwarfed, quaint as a cable car. The new Salesforce Tower stands as the tallest building in town. Nearby, Facebook just took out the city's largest lease on this building. And across the way, the Millennium Tower at 301 Mission Street. 645 feet of reinforced concrete wrapped in glass. Inside the $550 million construction, as advertised, lavish condominiums flush with amenities, attracting tech barons and venture capitalists. San Francisco royalty, former 49ers quarterback Joe Montana, bought here.
It's a wonderful location.
So did Jerry and Pat Dodson. 8 years ago, they paid $2.1 million for a 2-bedroom and planned to live out their retirement, enjoying the sweeping view from the 42nd floor.
Everything I had read indicated that it was the best building in San Francisco. It had won numerous awards. It had particularly won awards for construction, which was very important if you're thinking of moving into a high-rise.
Initially, no buyer's remorse.
No,
Absolutely
not at all. I mean, in fact, buyer euphoria.
One feature the Dodsons hadn't counted on. These devices are what?
They're stress gauges and they're
Dozens of stress gauges dot the walls of the Millennium Tower's basement. They measure in millimeters the slow growth of cracks along the columns that rise up from the building's foundation.
There's enough of them, a spider web of cracks, that you have to be concerned about what's going on underneath.
These cracks are one of the only visual clues that there's anything profoundly wrong here. These are the rounds you do now.
Yeah, I've been told by structural and geotechnical engineers that I should be watching.
Both an engineer and a lawyer, Dodson makes daily rounds of the basement looking for signs of deterioration. It's a routine he's kept since the Homeowners Association called a meeting of residents in May of 2016.
They just said we should be there and made us sign in, which alerted us at that time that there was something serious.
So what was the nature of that meeting?
It was the first time we were told that the building was sinking and was tilting.
Engineers for the tower's developer have tracked sinking here since the day the foundation was poured in 2006. Nothing unusual about that. Here's what is unusual. Their data shows the Millennium Tower sinking 17 inches so far and tilting 14 inches to the northwest.
Let me ask you this. What do you think is going on? Why is this happening? What can be done about it?
Once news got out, local politicians seized on the story.
I don't know.
And the very engineers celebrated for the building's design suddenly were being compelled to explain why the building was moving.
If you'd like to speak, please do approach the mic.
When the Millennium hearings opened to public comment, it brought some livelier moments.
I think what's needed here in the city by the bay, where everybody thinks everything's okay, but they might want to hear what I got to say.
This, after all, being San Francisco, a city once described as 49 square miles surrounded by reality. Aaron Peskin has a certain vitality himself. A longtime city supervisor, he starts most days with a swim in the bay, then meets constituents at a North Beach coffee shop, where the Millennium Tower is a popular topic. Peskin is leading hearings into what is causing the trouble. You subpoenaed some of the engineers involved with Millennium Tower. Why?
We don't generally like to subpoena people. That power has not been used by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors for some quarter of a century.
25 years, you've never issued a subpoena before.
That's correct.
When you got them in here, what'd you learn?
Their answers were less than satisfactory. Nobody has owned up to why this building is not performing.
Some homeowners aren't waiting around to find out. Andrew Falk and Frank Jernigan, who worked at Google when it was still a startup, got all the answers they needed when they rolled a marble across their floor.
We didn't do it but once, and this is what we got. We were shocked when that thing stopped, turned around, and started rolling back.
Back to where the building is tilting.
The northwest side.
I thought, we don't know if this building's going to stand up in an earthquake. And so I became severely frightened of that.
And we got out and we left. We left really most all of our belongings. We just left.
The couple sold their apartment earlier this year and moved to a 2-story home in the Pacific Heights neighborhood.
We sold it for approximately half of what it was valued at before this news came to light.
You lost 7 figures
Yes.
on the sale of this apartment.
Yes. That's right. I would say we lost $3 to $4 million.
Speaking of astronomical figures, half a world away in a suburb of Amsterdam, San Francisco's sinking tower came across the radar of Peter Marino, an engineer who works with the European Space Agency to track earthquakes. Using signals from a satellite 500 miles above the Earth, Marino measures ground movements around fault lines. In 2016, he happened to be studying the Bay Area when something caught his eye. This is obviously downtown San Francisco. What do the green dots represent?
Green dots represent stable.
no displacement or no significant displacement over
Stable
the same period
structures.
of time. Stable structures, yeah.
And the red dots?
Few red dots means something is going down, something is settling, something is subsiding, something is sinking.
Did you know what it was?
No.
Had you heard of Millennium Tower before this?
No.
Ever been to San Francisco?
No.
What can you tell us about the rate of sinking?
It's in the ballpark of between 1.5 to 2 inches a year.
1.5 to 2 inches a year?
Yeah.
And there's nothing to suggest the sinking and tilting are slowing down, much less stopping. But is it dangerous? As recently as this past summer, the city of San Francisco and its engineers asserted the building is safe, even in the event of an earthquake. Even so, and this is a central theme to this saga, there are as many opinions about the trouble at the Millennium Tower as there are engineers in the Bay Area.
There's a lot of things about this building that are unprecedented.
Jerry Cawthon, one of those local engineers, did not work on the tower but has worked on nearby projects.
Some sinking for buildings is acceptable, right?
Some is. They actually anticipated that over the life of the building it would sink about 4 to 5 inches. That's like a 100-year life.
This is double and triple that.
Yeah, I don't think they obviously didn't anticipate anything like this close to it.
By they, Cawthon means Millennium Partners, brand-name developers with high-end skyscrapers all over the country. Cawthon says their big mistake was building Millennium Tower out of concrete instead of steel.
Concrete is often cheaper, and it's just as good, but it is a lot heavier, so you got to design your foundation and your subsurface to support that higher weight.
What lies beneath the surface at 301 Mission Street is critical to the story. It fell to Millennium's geotechnical engineers to analyze the ground below and design an appropriate foundation. They went with a foundation driven 80 feet deep into a layer of dense sand, and the city approved the plan. Larry Karp is a local geotechnical engineer. He did not work on the tower either, but specializes in Bay Area soil conditions.
What is under the ground here?
What is under the ground here at the surface is rubble from the 1906 earthquake. Brick and sand and debris, everything you can imagine is down here.
You have to go 200 feet below the Millennium Tower through layers of history in the ground, below landfill from the time of the gold rush, sand, mud, and clay, to reach solid rock, or bedrock. Karp says the fact that the tower's foundation isn't anchored in bedrock, well, that's a problem.
For a big, heavy building, a concrete building, those foundations have to go deeper. For a building like this, they have to go to bedrock.
Otherwise, he says, the structure will sink into less sturdy layers of sand and mud. And because it doesn't sink or settle uniformly, you get tilting.
Look at the whole line.
Karp told us he can see the tilt from the middle of Mission Street a few blocks away. We couldn't see it, so we asked Jerry Cawthon if he could.
No, I don't, it's very hard to see. It's not enough of a tilt to see. This is not like the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
And there it is, the inevitable comparison to that greatest engineering gaffe of them all. Not the landmark any present-day developer wants to be associated with. Millennium Partners declined our request for an on-camera interview, but pointed out their tower was built to code. They blame their neighbors, specifically construction of the Transbay Terminal, San Francisco's answer to Grand Central Station, right next door. Transbay declined an on-camera interview too, but told us Millennium had already sunk 10 inches before work began on their project. And right on cue, here come the lawyers. Lawyers for Millennium Partners, for the Transbay Terminal next door, for the tower's structural engineers and geotechnical engineers, for the architect and the builder, for the Homeowners Association, and for the city, and yes, even for Joe Montana. There are 20 parties to various Millennium Tower lawsuits and counting.
It takes a half an hour just to take attendance of the lawyers in the courtroom. I mean, literally.
It's a lot of billable hours.
A lot of billable hours.
Courtroom circus aside, we asked Aaron Peskin, the city supervisor, simply, what's going on here?
Everybody is afraid to tell the truth, because if we get to the bottom of this, they are worried that it is going to, in some way, slow down the building boom that is happening in San Francisco.
Time is money in construction, and we don't want to stop this frenzy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This drama has hardly had a chilling effect. Everywhere you look in downtown San Francisco, they're building another skyscraper. And the latest must-have amenity for all these new constructions, bedrock. In what might be the first act of building-on-building bullying, tech giant Salesforce stuck it to Millennium via Twitter.
Bedrock, baby.
You think that was in reference to what's going on across the street?
I don't think it was in reference. I know it was in reference because I know the people who built that building.
The city still doesn't require all skyscrapers to go to bedrock, but it has made some changes to prevent another tower from leaning. More review of foundations for new tall buildings, for one. As for the Millennium Tower, on this, almost everyone agrees. It needs to be fixed.
What do we do with a tilting, sinking building?
I've heard freeze the ground, in perpetuity freeze the ground.
Perpetually freeze the ground.
Perpetually freeze the ground. They've talked about removing 20 stories from the top of it to reduce its weight.
What do you think of that? Lopping off, the top 20 stories.
That sounds like a horrible mess. I think more likely the surest way is to get it on piles to rock.
Bedrock. There may be no avoiding it. The parties are in mediation debating just how to drill down to bedrock under an existing skyscraper with 1,000 people living upstairs. And then there's the indelicate question, who pays for all this?
I am hopeful that the city and Millennium and the Homeowners Association will implement a fix in the near term and fight about the money later. But time's ticking.
Over the years, we've done stories on all sorts of people, but to our knowledge, we have never done one on a late middle-aged man who dresses in biker gear with visible tattoos and sterling silver skull rings, and certainly not one who also happens to be fluent in French and advanced mathematics. No, Peter Marino is one of a kind. If you follow the worlds of art, architecture, and high fashion, you probably know he is a serious player in all of them. A tastemaker for some of the richest, most sophisticated people in the world, many of whom would agree Marino's appearance is actually one of the least interesting things about him.
At first glance, you might mistake him for the bouncer at a leather bar, a professional wrestler, or the frontman for a Village People tribute band. But here in Paris, at a reception for the Biennale, one of the oldest art and antique fairs in the world,
Hi, how are you? Madame Rizzo.
Peter Marino is instantly recognized.
I'm a big fan of you. Oh, thank you, madam.
And actively courted by people you might think would run the other way.
A master.
But behind the threatening, keep-your-distance facade,
Monsieur, venez expliquer tout.
is an amusing, ironic, highly accomplished artist and businessman with a sensitive soul. His talents are demonstrated in the beauty and breadth of his design work and architecture, and contradict his carefully considered public image of a beast on a motorcycle.
People make first judgments about people based on their appearance. There's an old saying, the clothes make the man.
How about the older statement, don't judge a book by its cover?
But you want people to judge you by this look. This is your look.
Absolutely not. It's a decoy.
A decoy.
Sure. Would you think you're talking to a bright architect looking at a guy like me?
You still know calculus and trig and all of that stuff?
Had to get my license, and you got to keep your license up to date. You have to take 18 credits a year. That's the hardest part. You got to keep taking courses. Dude, they don't let you forget it. Yeah.
The arts and fashion worlds have always had a high tolerance for eccentricity. Take Tom Wolfe in his white suits, Karl Lagerfeld's dark glasses and fingerless gloves, and Lady Gaga.
On your left, guys.
There is no question that Marino's signature look has made him one of a handful of living architects actually recognized by the media.
One of your good friends said that you like the shock value. Like you like the fact that people say, what's with him?
I like more the fact that I like to think out of the box. Thinking out of the box goes along with dressing out of the box and living out of the box. If you want to come up with a really original design idea, and you want to capture a whole new design direction. Perhaps the best way to arrive at that is not by acting and thinking and doing like everybody else. That's all.
If the getup was simply a publicity gimmick, Marino would have disappeared decades ago. His work would not be regularly featured in Architectural Digest and other glossy magazines. And the firm that bears his name would not be occupying 2 floors and 16,000 square feet of some of the most expensive office space in New York, which is furnished with museum-quality artwork, all from Marino's private collection. Paintings and sculpture, modern art and antiquities, all juxtaposed in perfect harmony.
This is quite a room. Quite a reception area. What is this piece?
This is 2003 Anselm Kiefer.
And this?
This is Gandharan, 3rd century AD.
Gandharan?
Yeah, it's from Gandhara, and it's the region just on the Silk Road where the Chinese culture and the Indian culture just met with the Greek culture. So you see
Art is at the center of Marino's universe, and his knowledge of it is encyclopedic. He not only collects it, he curates it and commissions it for his projects. It covers nearly every inch of wall space and is here, he says, not to impress his clients, but to inspire the staff of 150 designers and architects with whom he turns out between 50 and 100 projects a year.
Design-wise, I look at everything. If I don't personally design it, I'll review it. I'm the kind of creative director of the firm.
You're a bit of a control freak.
You'd have to ask the staff for that.
Bordering on the tyrannical.
You'd have to confirm that with the staff.
Do you see yourself as a tyrannical boss?
No, I only care about the work, and I am not tyrannical personally in any way, shape, or form, but I am absolutely passionate about the quality of the work.
And so are the clients that can afford him, who mostly come from the world's wealthiest 1/100th of 1%, encompassing the glitterati and the emirati.
This is a residential project we're building on the top of Los Angeles. It's a large site assembled from over 7 homes, and this is in construction.
And what is this structure?
This is for the subterranean parking.
And this is a private home?
This is a private home. It's
And can you tell us anything about the owner?
No.
It's Marino's default answer. He won't comment about his clients, which have reportedly included the likes of multi-billionaires David Geffen and David Koch, as well as Gisele Bündchen and Tom Brady. This home in Milan, we're told, was done for Giorgio Armani.
I like my clients. All of my clients say, Peter, you're talented, but your best virtue is your discretion. They really don't want to be talked about.
This Hamptons beach house was designed for a young hedge fund manager and his wife, and this ski chalet in Lebanon with ocean views for a Swiss banker. But for every private client Marino won't speak about, somewhere in the world he is unveiling a project that is the talk of the town. Like Boon the Shop, a multi-brand luxury shopping center that takes up 2 downtown blocks in Seoul, South Korea. No expense was spared.
It's all white Greek marble. These are trapezoids, like they fell to space. It's an interesting building because the entire inside is rough concrete.
He says it was built for the family that controls Samsung.
It's fair to say you work with some of the richest people in the world, right?
Yes.
Did they need to be treated a different way?
If they need to be treated a different way, no one's told me. I remember when I was meeting certain royal families, if I had to behave a certain way, like, you better tell me what I'm supposed to say and do. They went, the way you look, it doesn't really matter, just be yourself. And I went, okay.
Those partnerships can produce some unusual optics. We watched this meeting with Sidney Toledano, the CEO of Christian Dior, who is one of Marino's biggest clients and biggest fans. They have collaborated on dozens of Dior boutiques all over the world. Toledano is used to working with big egos and difficult people, but says Marino is not one of them.
I never had the impression that it was complicated because he always finds a solution, and he's very professional.
How important is it to your business? Or how important has he been to your business?
He has been key. Don't tell him.
He understands Dior.
He understands Dior.
Toledano sees Marino's look as an artistic presentation of his personality. He doesn't even mind the fact that Marino also works for most of his competitors.
This is a new building we'll be building for Chanel.
So you've got Chanel up here, you've got
Louis Vuitton.
Louis Vuitton. Who else?
Dior, Hublot, Zegna. We do Zegna worldwide. We do Bulgari. We're opening a new one in London in December. Fendi, if you just saw the Fendi on 57th and Madison.
For decades, Marino has been the architect of choice for nearly all of the top fashion designers and luxury brands, and is widely credited with reimagining the use of retail space, moving away from boxy department stores and into elegant boutiques. His work lines the most conspicuous avenues and boulevards of the world. It's a third of his business. Every store is unique, and each one distills the essence and the look of the company it was built for. A sense of travel and luxury for Louis Vuitton, the timeless classic look for Chanel.
How did you get them to all come to you?
It's the old question you say, why do they all go to you? Steve, would you go to a knee doctor who had done 2 knee operations if you need an operation, or one who had done 300 successfully? Who would you go to? That's why they come to me.
Marino's work ethic and personality are rooted in Queens, the New York neighborhood where he was born 67 years ago, the only son in a middle-class Italian family. In high school, he excelled in art and graduated from Cornell University in 1971 with a degree in architecture. He learned the trade from the very best, serving apprenticeships with I.M. Pei in Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. But he picked up the ways of the wealthy and the value of celebrity from another master, artist Andy Warhol, who always considered business one of the finer forms of art.
He certainly knew how to get attention.
The blonde wig. Dude, that was so good. The blonde wig, it's pretty hard to beat.
Marino did some early work for Warhol and hung out at his New York studio called The Factory, which was a magnet for music and movie stars, socialites, and royalty. Bob Colacello was the editor of Warhol's Interview magazine when Marino first walked through the door.
And what was he like?
He had little bow ties, and he was very properly dressed. You know, when he was funny, he was talented. You could see that right away.
Colacello, now a contributing editor at Vanity Fair magazine, and Isabel Rattazzi, a former model and longtime friend of Marino, think he has changed very little from those ironic factory days of Campbell soup cans and pop art parodies of fame.
Peter fed right into that. I mean, we were all on the same sort of wavelength, you know.
Tongue-in-cheek.
Tongue-in-cheek. A lot of what we were doing was very tongue-in-cheek. And Peter, I think, is still very tongue-in-cheek.
Totally. He's enjoying it. It's a way to have fun at other people's expenses sometimes. I think Peter, deep down, more than anything, is an artist. He has an incredible sense of aesthetics. He loves beauty and anything in art and music.
It's on display at Marino's 12-acre estate, where every summer there is a lavish party for friends to introduce young and up-and-coming classical musicians. It's hosted by Peter and Jane Trapnell, his waspy wife of 33 years, a charming and accomplished costume designer who friends say is an essential part of the equation.
She's too smart to be interviewed.
But you've been married a long time.
33 years. Yeah, it's great.
You don't look like the perfect couple, if you know what I mean.
It's a good marriage because each of us is what we are, allows the other one to be themselves, and appreciates each other for the right reason. You know, it's rare that you'll find two people who don't try to change the other person and let everyone be what they are.
What's this?
The only other constant in Marino's life, as you may have guessed, are motorcycles, his latest prominently displayed on the project board.
This is my Super Duke KTM 1290. Oof. It's very fast. You're supposed to say, does Jane sit on the back?
Does Jane sit on the back?
Absolutely not. She's in the back of a car and driver, and with the 2 dogs.
Marino finds cars claustrophobic. He has a half a dozen bikes, has ridden them all over the country, and regularly uses them to commute between New York and his home on Long Island. It's his release, and the core of his identity. Alone, on the road, where he can take in the air and the light and the space, all part of living life outside the box.